The reason that majority of vets are recommending ultra-processed food is because that's all we learn about. Most of the education we get in vet school is very minimal and it's very feed-focused, not very food-focused. There's actually quite a few studies now that are showing that there are huge benefits from feeding fresh food, and studies showing that fresh foods are more digestible than ultra-processed food. Don't come when your dog's been on medication for 8 years. It's hard to fix things that have been broken for a very long time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it takes so much effort and so much work and so much time that most people don't have the patience to see it through. I really encourage anyone watching this to please just come, even as a prevention, to talk about vaccines, to talk about castrations, to talk about diet, so we can get it from a good start from the beginning.
Welcome to the DAFY Podcast, the place where you will get expert-led and science-backed advice on dog health and nutrition. No more confusion and no more conflicting opinions. Just clear guidance to help you make informed decisions for your pup. Because when it comes to our dogs, they deserve the very best care. And we, as dog parents, deserve confidence in the choices we make for them. Let's meet our expert. Tina, welcome to the DAFY Podcast. It's so great to have you on again.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. I will take that as a compliment.
Definitely. I knew we were going to do a part 2 at some point. I'm really excited. And actually today I feel like we're talking about a topic that is very hot right now in the kind of dog nutrition world. And that topic is kind of fresh feeding. So whether it is kind of gently cooked or raw feeding, I saw a lot of kind of dog owners being really confused because, you go to the vet, you get told specific things, then you go online on the internet, you get told something else. So I wanted to bring an expert, and I love kind of your expertise because, you're a vet, but you've taken loads of kind of additional qualification in nutrition, and you love your research and your science. So I think you are an amazing guest to kind of be talking about this topic with. Yeah, so the first question is, I feel like, many owners kind of are saying fresh feeding is healthier. That's what the kind of conception is. However, when you go to the vet, and I had that myself as an owner as well, many kind of conventional vets are still a little bit cautious, especially when we talk about raw feeding. Yes. So the first question is, how do you look at the research that we've got kind of so far on fresh feeding, and what is your view on that?
Yeah, well, shortly, the studies are showing, there's actually quite a few studies now that are showing that there are huge benefits from feeding fresh food. And from my professional opinion, if you're looking at all the studies, looking at potential pathogens and so on in raw food, most of it's assumptions. If you read if you actually go in and you read the research papers, it says it may cause, it has the potential to cause. But there's actually not a lot of studies out there showing that it actually is an issue. So yeah, just talking a little bit from the vet's point of view as well, I think, the reason that majority of vets are recommending ultra-processed food is because that's all we learn about. At least up until this point, most of the education we get in vet school, I'm sure every university has a slightly different approach depending on the teacher, but historically it's always been about feed. We learn about feed, not about food. So essentially what I learned about at vet school was how feed production worked. We learned quite a lot about cattle and how to prevent disease in cattle because it's quite profitable to not have sick cattle, actually, and our university had a lot of focus on that. But kibble, pet food wise, what we would learn about was how kibble was made and nutritional deficiencies and diseases that was directly linked to nutrition. And that's it. We didn't talk anything about how food could actually help the animal besides, lowering symptoms from hydrolyzed diets or something like this. So I would say just our nutritional education is very minimal and it's very feed focused, not very food focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point, isn't it? And do you think vets are reluctant of recommending? I mean, don't get me wrong. I speak to vets all the time now, and even local vets around me, and they are a little bit more open to the idea of, fresh food, especially when we talk about gently cooked. But do you think a big part of the issue is the fact that obviously, if something was to go wrong, a licensed vet can get into trouble if they actively recommend things like raw feeding. Do
Oh,
you think
yeah.
that's part of the problem?
Yes, I absolutely think so. The thing though with ultra processed foods is that there is money in making everything the same and standardizing it and
Mm.
selling it and using human byproducts and cheap fillers to sell it as food, and it's very profitable. It's one of the biggest businesses in the world at the moment. So that's the main part, that the research is out there for the ultra processed food. There is research showing that this and this diet can help for this, and there's research showing that there's no change in health parameters, and so on for a certain amount of time. So whatever kind of happens with that, we have research to back us up. And accidents
Yeah.
happen even with ultra processed food. We have the huge incident of melamine toxicosis when they put and sometimes they put too much vitamin D, and then they kill a lot of animals. And the mold toxicity, aflatoxins, is a huge one that's killed loads of pets, and even salmonella and kibble, made loads of kids sick. So it's not sterile, it's not 100% safety in ultra processed food either. I guess it's just that it has the research so that we can kind of lean on that, because I think a part of the issue as well is that if something were to happen, we are responsible. And if we don't have the research to back up what we have said, then it becomes a bit of an issue. So I know actually several vets who actively lost their license because they were practicing more holistic modalities in veterinary medicine. So that's why even like us needs to be really cautious, because if you have the wrong client and they come at you and then the board thinks that what you're doing is not supported enough by evidence, then you can actually lose your license and you can't actively work as a practitioner anymore. So I think, yeah, that can definitely be part of the issue, is that we have to be cautious with what we're saying as well. There's no studies showing that
Yeah.
ultra processed food is better or give better health than fresh food either. There's more studies actually proving the opposite now.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, I completely agree. And then another thing that kind of like makes me worried about ultra processed food personally is the how do you call them, advanced glycation end products. Can you talk to me about that?
Yes. So basically, even when we're cooking, that is initially called a Maillard reaction. Actually, I'm not sure how you pronounce that in English, but that's it. And then, so when starches react with proteins of fat under higher temperatures, you get essentially something called advanced glycation end product, AGEs or ALEs, advanced lipid peroxidation end products, which essentially are causing inflammation in the body indirectly. And that's even
Mm.
shown in studies. And we know this in humans, that eating ultra processed food is bad for us. And I talk about a lot of this in my course as well, why processing matters. There's, a couple of easy things you can do as an owner, just looking at the food. That is, look at the ingredient list. It's so important. Anything you buy, please read the ingredient list. And secondly, have a thought about how the food you're eating was processed, because majority of kibble is the most heavily processed type of feed you can get for your pet, essentially, and it's gone through several cycles of heat processing up to really high temperatures, and you have a much higher amount of AGEs and ALEs in the kibble. And the thing is, it has an accumulative effect both in the food and in the body. So you can actually test. They've actually tested for this, and dogs fed ultra processed food have much higher levels of AGEs in the body, and we know that they cause inflammation. So yeah, there are studies showing that, it is bad for us, essentially, both for humans and for animals. So
Yeah. I love to. What I'm going to do at the end of when I publish this podcast, I'm going to link and I'm going to share it with you beforehand, but I'm going to link all the studies about what we're talking about, because I think it's really important for people to be able to access the studies and actually see it for themselves. And, because, my main outcome here is just educate as many dog owners as possible. And I think like you just don't know what you don't know, right? Until like you can educate yourself on what the right thing to do is. you know Sometimes we just assume, okay, it's just AG, it's fine, but it's like when you actually read what's been done and what's been tested and the results of that, you would then have that aha kind of moment to say, I actually, from it's common sense in a way, but you have to educate yourself on that. It doesn't just happen like like that, right? Just by walking the food aisle and, learning about it, you have to kind of like read the studies and really understand what they're saying. And yeah, I love that. So I have seen quite a lot of studies as well, but again, I don't know how to read them properly. And there is so much like anger between different experts where they say, oh, but they're not reading the study properly, or, this is not true, or this is here, this is there. So yeah, I wish someone would just kind of do some like videos for dog owners that would just break it down in a really simple way. And, because science is science, it changes every day. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you have to like be open to that. And then you have the part of, wow, this is what's happening in the world. We live in a very toxic world. We have cancer everywhere. So why is that happening? And, that you have to educate yourself on as a why, as opposed to just accept that that's what it is and you just need to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And in the work that I'm currently
Yeah.
doing, I have the opportunity to actually do quite a lot of research as well. So I have access to and read quite a lot of research papers. And one thing I've noticed in the end as well is that sometimes you can take a little bit what you want out of the research study. A study is meant to be very objective with the findings, and depending on who reads it, because the thing is, most people don't actually read the studies. They just pull out a topic or something that they see and they're like, oh my god, studies showed this. But then you actually go into the study and then it's like, well, actually
Yeah.
that's not what the study is saying at all. So the thing is,
Yeah.
most people don't want to read
Yeah.
the studies because they're really long. They have abstracts, but it's still very confusing to read, even for a professional. It's difficult wordings, and they don't always put it as not every study has an easy conclusion to it. So for example, my boss
Yes.
wasn't very keen on me selling or promoting raw foods, and then he sent me a couple research papers to it, and then I sent him back like my own thoughts about the study, and most of it was assumptions, and even within the study saying that it might have can carry potential pathogens. It even says that actually we saw better coat, better teeth health on the dogs that were fed raw food. So
Yeah.
even within that study, it even said that it was healthier for them, but there was a potential. And even the study didn't conclude that there was found any bacteria. It was just the potential was there, but they couldn't confirm anything.
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, you know,
Yeah. I
so yeah.
agree. I obviously I have Rusty, like he's been on a raw diet for many, many years. And, it's like, in a way, it's kind of like when we talk about fresh food, right? You've got obviously the plus and minuses. You have to be aware of what the risks are. And I think as long as dog owners are aware of it, then they can make their own decisions. But the reality of it is, I feed a diet, Rusty. I just trust the company. I put 100% of my trust in the company I'm choosing for them to make sure it's as pathogen free as possible, do all the testing that they can do to make sure that, and this is why, I feel like if I just go and randomly just buy meat from everywhere and then just feed it to my dog, I don't have that kind of additional layer of safety. So when you look at, when you speak to your clients and the dog owners that you work with, what is your kind of like thought on if they wanted to cook a like homemade food, what's your process and what are your feedback straight away around a homemade diet?
That is very diverse, and I look a lot into the client, their budget, what they want to do, because I think essentially the perfect diet for one person is not the perfect one for the next. It depends on safety and the education of the owner. It depends on the animal's age, health. It just depends on so many things. So actually recently I've done mostly referrals, and most of them are really sick, so I put most of them on a cooked homemade diet. Ideally,
Yeah.
if the animal, so there's different methods to go on about this, and different professionals will have different approaches depending on their beliefs and their training. So you have the method of creating a complete and balanced plan, where essentially you tell them maybe what you want to feed, and then the vet goes and formulates, or a nutritionist will go and formulate it and see that it meets all the requirement of AFCO or FEDIAF. But again, then you kind of limit yourself to like one recipe. Then the animals still mostly get that one recipe. So say, I don't know, that contains tuna or something, then it has a lot of mercury or like heavy metals in it. And then they eat that every day. So then they accumulates, So a lot of us more holistic practitioners have gone more onto rotating, like feed real movement, for example, are very much about variation. And formulating a diet takes hours and hours, especially when you have a dog with a lot of restrictions. It takes hours. And I've actually just realized as well why not a lot of people, especially vets, are doing this work. It's because it takes a long time to make one diet, and then essentially there's a limit to how much you can charge for a piece of paper with one diet, and then you also restrict the owners to only have that one diet if it costs a fortune. So yeah, I've personally hit a bit of a roadblock there where I charge, I get probably less than $10 an hour for what I'm doing. So it is a bit of a struggle really to make it profitable because, well, it takes ages, a lot of knowledge. The programs we use are really expensive, and then what can you charge people for it versus how long it takes? So it is a bit of a struggle. But anyways, what you can also do, what a lot of practitioners have started doing now, is just to use one of these calculators you can find online. Make sure you find a good one though, because some of them are lacking a lot of things. If they're lacking bones, calcium, if they're lacking organs and liver, it's probably not a good one. But a lot of these calculators can be very helpful to make a little bit of a ratio, to make some variety, and to make sure that there are the most of the things they will get. I think also like pulse dosing with things that are very nutritious, like liver or muscles, like things that are very full of specific nutrients that lack in a lot of other aspects, is important. But so yeah, the short answer is you can formulate it with a vet so it's complete and balanced, but again, then you're limited to that one recipe unless you buy another recipe. Or you can find a trustworthy calculator online where you can put in what you can buy that day or that week, and then you can formulate it yourself. And then variation becomes the most important things to kind of balance over time. And then having some knowledge of what typical diets are lacking in, so you can pulse those and add additional whole foods or supplements to kind of combat that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And have you ever had an experience where you seen an animal kind of like on a homemade diet that was kind of like struggling with like a lack of nutrients, where you did like a hair mineral analysis or a blood test, and you realize actually the diet, if you want to home cook, you have to really make sure you work with a nutritionist? Because I'm part of a group, I tell you why, just to give you a bit of context. On Facebook there are 400,000 people like there every day, home cooking for the dogs. And don't get me wrong, I agree with the rotational part of things that you're saying, like it's true. But then in my head, I'm like, but what if, unintentionally, I don't give Rusty exactly what he needs to thrive. And then over time, and let's say, especially if I'm not doing like a test every single, like, I don't know, every 6 months or every year, I wouldn't have a clue, because, so many times the lack of nutrients can take years of, to show in terms of like health issues, chronic health issues, or health issues that will show up as part of it. So, do you feel like a complete and balanced diet is something dog owners should always look for to achieve? Or are you more of a believer of, rotational is better?
To be honest with you, I personally, my personal preference, if you have a healthy animal that can eat anything, and you have time and the owner is educated enough, then personally, I think just rotating and creating your own with a good calculator online is really good. Not everyone has that option. If they're doing an elimination diet, they have diet restrictions, if there's a lot of ifs, but if you have the possibility and healthy animals to do so, that is probably my preferred way to feed. Just like you don't measure every single thing that you eat either. You kind of have an idea of like what your plate should look like. For us, some protein, some vegetables, and a small amount of carbohydrates is, in general, a good picture. And it's funny also that you ask. So I'm just going to share with you completely my personal experience. And I see a lot of animals on a lot of different diets. And I've seen quite a lot of animals on home cooked diets, and majority of them I can just hear they are very deficient by definition. A lot of them don't give any bones or any calcium whatsoever. A lot of them, give a lot of carbs. That's one of the things I see maybe the most, is that they're a bit obese. But otherwise, knock on wood, so far I haven't seen a direct correlation of any deficiencies correlated to that diet. Majority of the studies, come out for deficiencies is quite extreme cases where they would feed like raw fish only with a lot of thiaminase, for example, depleting thiamine, or puppies or kittens with a completely off calcium phosphorus ratio, stuff like that. But in adults, I haven't personally still seen any obvious deficiencies in home cooked for patients that are home cooked for. But as a professional, obviously I should say that, you should balance your meals and try to stay on track or do some testing to make sure that they're getting everything that they need. What I would recommend, especially if you're, formulating yourself, you're not necessarily, doing the complete imbalance, would be to do an occasional hair mineral analysis, maybe every 6 months, just to kind of see. And then if your levels are completely off, you see you need more zinc, then you will start supplementing your diet with a lot of that, maybe retest in like 3 to 4 months, see what it looks like. But I would also work with a practitioner that knows how to read the hair mineral analysis as well.
Yeah.
Because that can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
I have a lot of things coming up in the future. I just haven't gotten that far because I'm working a lot outside of my own company. But one thing you mentioned, that is educating yourself about raw food, which is one of my next projects. I want to create a course on how to safely feed raw for pet parents, and I want to teach them everything. Like, I want them to get a microbiology lesson to learn everything that we know, so they can be almost better educated than most vets about it. And then if the vets comes and say, oh, then they will just say, actually, no, because I sourced it here and there, and I know this and this and this. So that's one of my next, hopefully, upcoming courses eventually. I also want to put up an option on my website so that people can deliver a hair mineral analysis, and I can give them back some answers on how to interpret the results, because as of today, not a lot of the results for animals are very conclusive, so they can be a bit confusing to get for pet owners.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Absolutely love that. I think that's so much needed because there is so much confusion out there on this area. And I feel like coming from a vet, because you're an integrity vet, right? Like you practice both conventional and holistic. I think that's really, really powerful. Yeah, I love that. And so just a question about homemade diets, right? So if my dog is got like some kind of health issue, right? Like let's say like, they go to the vet, they're like, oh, I've got a little bit of a liver problem or allergies and things like that. Like, how important is it to ensure that a diet is complete and balanced then? Or is this still like a case of rotational? Because my understanding is if there is some kind of like underlying health issue, then at that point, again, that's what I hear from other experts I'm talking with, is you should work with a board certified vet nutritionist and not anymore with someone that has some kind of degree in animal nutrition. So how does that work? So I've got a dog with kind of like some health issues and I want to put them on a homemade diet. Who would you work with in that case?
Yeah, so that's quite a nuanced question, actually, because it's interesting that you ask as well, because, for example, in dogs there are essential nutrients, so for example amino acids that they need to survive, but then there's also the ones that are called, conditionally essential. So if they're stressed, sick, if there's some other toxins or something that depletes some kind of nutrients, then they become essential. During stressful times and even disease, sometimes there's amino acids and different nutrients that can become essential. So being stressed and being ill depletes your vitamin C, even though they can produce their own vitamin C. So yes, essentially, when they get sick and stressed, they have a higher need for a lot of different nutrients. Essentially, I guess it depends what the issue is, to be honest. A board certified veterinarian is generally like American. We don't really have board certification the same way. We have specialists in nutrition. I guess I don't really think you call it board certified, but if you can afford and have access to board certified nutrition, then absolutely that's what you should do. There are, however, not that many of them, and not everyone can afford them, and not every country has them. If you do have issues, especially chronic issues, my go-to would always be to say, keep, your Western practitioner for any emergencies and to cooperate and do any testing. But if you can also have a more integrative practitioner on your team that preferably can work together with your Western practitioner, and they can work together. It's like having a team of experts. You don't want to just rely on one person, because in the end of the day, we're all still humans, right? And we can't be perfect at everything. And so, the most Western practitioners are focusing on emergencies and electrolyte imbalances and so on to fix all the symptoms that are right there in front of you, which is awesome. But then you also have other practitioners now, as we call ourselves, integrative or holistic, that focus more on root cause, different testing, more like microbiome testing, glyphosate testing, mold toxicity, hair mineral analysis, those kind of things, using different tools. So I think it's important to have both on your team, basically, is what I think.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think that's so missing right now, isn't it? It's just like you just don't have access to these unless you go and really search for it and look on the internet. And, the same way I found you and I found so many other experts. I mean, obviously I do what I do, right? But I'm still a dog owner at the end of the day. And yeah, I feel like it's one of the most powerful thing you can do is have both of these kind of like, personas of person in, like caring for your dog is, okay, my dog is sick now. I need to go to the vet. General advice, I'll go to the vet. But if there is something deeper going on, I need to go and speak to that person because, that's what they specialize in. And I love that.
Yeah,
I
I
absolutely love
always,
that. And that's why I want all of you in one place.
yeah. I think that's also like, I'm always open-minded, to get a second opinion. I do that with myself if I don't feel like the practitioner have, enough information of the issues that I'm having. And the same should be for pet parents. They shouldn't always just accept that one person knows everything. You can, if you don't agree, if something doesn't sound right, just, go and ask for a second opinion, and maybe look a little bit up who you're asking for a second opinion. If there is like an expert in that area and if their values align with yours, I think is also important, because I see a lot of more holistically minded people, and they go from different Western practitioners and don't really get the answers or the understanding that they're looking for. So yeah, I think it's important also to find someone that vibes with you. Everyone's different. Not everyone loves me, so not everyone would love a super Western or a super holistic practitioner. So you just have to find the people that you vibe with and that you align with and that you can trust with your animal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the outcome is, to just help the animal, right? And give everything you've got in your power in your toolbox to help that animal. I think everyone is doing that in a way, even conventional vets are. That's the tools they have available to them. And that's why sometimes you don't get as many infos compared to like more of an integrative vet. Completely agree with you. So let's talk about like fresh food. You have like, wet food, okay, but then the most popular one out there right now are gently cooked and raw. Can you give me a little bit of a, why would an option be better than the other? Like I'm a dog owner and I'm looking to put my dog on fresh food. Why should I choose gently cooked versus raw, vice versa?
Okay, so that's another very nuanced question where I would have a lot of follow-up questions to make that decision. At the end of the day, it's your preference. You can always try, because if one thing doesn't work, then the other might work a lot better. So yeah, okay, where do I start? Raw versus cooked. So firstly is for you as an owner, are you comfortable feeding raw? Do you have super young children, anyone in the house that are immunocompromised, someone where you didn't want to take the risk of feeding raw? Obviously it's not sterile. And if you have someone who's on immunotherapy, or after an organ transplant, if you have someone with a baby, very young baby, still developing their immune system, anyone super old with different comorbidities, then you might don't want to take that risk. And also, like, it doesn't have to be black or white. If your pet works with both, you can switch on them. So like if you have a visitor or something, you can, or you're setting them away and then they're not comfortable feeding, raw food, you can switch to something else. Like it doesn't have to be constant. When it comes to the animal itself, I usually look at, the age. So specifically like older animals, especially if they've been like kibble fed their whole life, they tend to not tolerate raw food as well. So they tend to do better on a freshly cooked diet, gently cooked diet. So especially if they are older, if they have some kind of diseases, like if they have IBD or are struggling a lot with digesting things are coming out undigested. Obviously, there will be a lot of other things I would ask and find out what is wrong with the animal, but essentially usually we start them off with a cooked diet. Some find it hard to keep weight on their dogs if they have a very super active dog. and they prefer a cooked meal with a little bit more carbohydrate simply to keep the weight on them. There's also some variation within breeds. So I find that, particularly like the northern breeds and the large breed dogs, the more ancient breed dogs that comes from, typically overbred and does not digest starch as well. They usually do a lot better in like a raw diet as well with lower carbohydrates. So again, it depends a little bit on the breed. Some smaller dogs do really well on raw, but some smaller dogs just do better on cooked food. Maybe sometimes if they're struggling with hunger pukes, then one might work better than the other. And then it also depends, do they have the teeth and the stomach to digest bones? Because if you're feeding raw, obviously you need to give them calcium, so then you usually give them bones, whether it's ground up in pre-made food or if you're giving them a chew. So that's also a question. Obviously, if they don't digest bone very well, if they can't, don't have the teeth to chew bones, or they don't digest it well, even if it's ground up, that's another reason to maybe go into cooked food. So yeah, I think it depends a lot on a lot of different things. I explain a lot of these in my course as well on how to choose the right food for your dog. But that's some of the things that I would look to when I would choose.
Yeah, love that. Absolutely love that. And from a digestibility perspective, are there because that's the kind of thing again that I hear all the time, right? So like the big companies out there have got years and years and years of research that backs up and like the food that they sell and things like that. And then the other pushback I hear from kind of conventional vets all the time is, fresh food companies that just pop up like every single day nowadays, or raw feeding companies. And, there is they say normally there is not really an expert formulating it, so they don't have like a nutrition or a vet or someone specialized in nutrition formulating it. And also the fact that they don't know how highly whether that food is highly digestible for the dog or not. The ingredients they're using, they are being the nutrients within the ingredients they're using are really being digested in the right way. What is your view on that? Is there any evidence that fresh food is better than, or raw food is better than kind of ultra processed from a digestibility perspective?
Oh yeah, there are actually studies showing that fresh foods are more digestible than ultra processed food. And also you typically see, less feces, which is also a sign that, firstly there's a lot more water, but they also tend to take up a lot more of the nutrients. So I can literally send you a paper. I was looking at one the other day that says that the digestibility is much better of fresh food than ultra processed.
Yeah, I love that. And another question I hear all the time from dog owners is how, and I know you have a little bit of, I don't know if it's a course or a video course or like a PDF guide, transitioning dogs. So my dog is on kibble. I want to try him or her on a gently cooked or fresh food diet or a raw diet. What's the best way, in your opinion, to help a dog owner to transition their dog safely?
Yeah, I absolutely have a free PDF on my website that they can go and download with all the tips and tricks. There are different ways of doing it. So some people, if they have a healthy young animal who's, had a bit of variety of foods, can sometimes just do a cold turkey, just on the day, just switch the food, and that's perfectly fine for some. However, especially if you haven't had a dog who's been on the same food for a very long time and they're a little bit sensitive, and every time they eat something else, then they will get an upset tummy or something like that, then you probably have a dog with a very limited microbiome. And the thing is that when you have a certain amount of species that are there, because they know that the food that is coming is for all these bacteria, but then suddenly you give something else that you need different proportions of bacteria to digest it, then there becomes a big switch in the gastrointestinal tract. There can be pH changes, even the enzymes that are being produced can take weeks to actually accommodate a new diet. So if there's more starches, if there's more fat, it literally takes weeks for the DNA to switch over the production of those enzymes. So essentially, slow is usually gold. So to do it over at least 2 weeks slowly, just start with it as a little treat, see how you go, monitor the stools a lot, and then take it slowly. You can just start, taking out a small fraction of that food and then adding back in the fresher version, and then take it slowly more and more, monitor the stool, and as long as the stool is fine, then you can continue until you've switched over completely. There are some nutraceuticals you can use for just to help a little bit, like slippery elm or marshmallow root, probiotics, stuff like that, and some prebiotics. There's a lot of things you can do as well. I think I wrote most of it down in the free PDF anyways. But yeah, so normally for
Yeah.
most dogs, going slow 2 weeks.
Yes. No, that's amazing. Perfect. Yes, that's good. And in terms of success stories, right? You've worked with so many different kind of like dog owners over time. Can you share with me one or a couple of success stories that you had where, a dog was kind of going through a chronic issue and you've managed to kind of help that chronic issue through fresh food?
Yeah, so honestly, majority of my success stories actually is from clinical practice when people come in early. I really want to emphasize this as well. Like, if you're watching this and you're having minor issues, please come see us now. Don't come in like 10 years when your dog's been on medication for 8 years, and it's hard to fix things that have been broken for a very long time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it takes so much effort and so much work and so much time that most people don't have the patience to see it through. So I really encourage anyone watching this to please just come, even as a prevention. I'm happy to take clients just to talk about vaccines, to talk about castrations, to talk about diet, so we can get it from a good start from the beginning. So some success stories that I've had has mostly been people that have come into my clinic, not knowing anything about me being holistic or anything like that, just worked in a conventional practice. For example, I had one 6-month-old. It was a northern breed, and he was on like a really ultra processed food, and she had issues basically since she got the dog. It was always some new skin issue and some new itchy thing or some new bald patch. And this time she told me a little bit about the history of like skin issues, and we kept giving stuff and we kept giving creams, and it kept coming back and coming somewhere else. And this time it was around the anus. It was completely, dry and crusted and itchy and very, very painful. And so, we checked the anal glands and everything looked normal there. It was literally a localized skin reaction. And I looked at the owner, and she was actually really reluctant as well to change the diet. She didn't like raw. She wasn't really onto that, that page. But I normally don't push people to change their diet if they're not comfortable. But this case was very specific. It was a northern breed. It was a really young dog struggling with skin and chronic issues from such a young age, that I kind of pushed her a little bit. Like, I swear to you, I'm like 95% sure that if you switch him to this diet, I even showed her what diet, I'm like 95% sure that all of your issues will go away. You won't have to spend any more money on this, because obviously the next step conventionally would be doing biopsies, starting him on more medications, and he would probably go down that line of more and more testing, more and more medication, giving more side effects, needing more medication, and then just getting worse and worse, and it all just snowballs. That I managed to get her over to. So in Norway, we don't actually have a lot of fresh food diets. We have, I think, about like 3 raw diets to choose from. And one of them is probably my favorite, doesn't have any synthetic additives. And a lot of them actually so they have puppy food as well, which was important because this was a 6-month-old still growing puppy. And a lot of them they had like reindeer, cold water fish, all these things that are essential for cold breed dogs. We already know that like ancient breeds, and especially the cold breeded dogs, usually need more vitamin D, omega-3, zinc, all these things. And so I was looking into, because they're literally designed to live in a cold climate, and animals that live in cold climates usually have much higher omega-3s, more vitamin E, all these things like fatty fish, reindeer, anything living in the cold usually have these nutrients naturally. So I just put him on that fresh, fully raw diet that contained, I think it was reindeer and fish, and all the problems went away. And so the owner was
Wow.
very happy. So I think I saved her a lot of money just on that. But I'm so happy
I
when they
love
come
that.
in
I
early.
honestly love.
Yeah, it's so much easier when they
Yeah.
come in early. I have had also, like, for example, there was a Frenchie that came in. He's been to the vet, I don't know, for years. Ear infection, new ear infection, another ear infection, just never stopped. And nobody ever really talked about the diet besides the hydrolyzed, diet. And I think for some reason that didn't even work very well for him. He was more itchy or got more loose tummy or something like that. So I think he wasn't even on that. And then I I asked, have you ever tried him on a raw diet? And then he was like, no. And I was like, you really should try him on a raw, novel protein, lower carb diet. And he was like, I'm willing to try like anything. He's had chronic ear infections for, I think it was years. And then, so I put him on a raw rabbit diet. And then he came back, I think it was a few months later, just for, I think, something else. And then I think he didn't recognize me in the beginning, but he was like, oh yeah, one of you guys recommended me to put him on the raw rabbit diet. And now he hasn't had a single ear infection since. So yeah,
It's
I had quite
amazing.
a few guys. Which is a quick
I
fix,
love
it's
that.
not always.
Honestly, yeah, that's it. I completely agree with you. It's a quick fix, isn't it? It's just like, yeah, it's such a simple change. Because I was talking to Dr. Odette yesterday, and obviously I asked her the question, okay, a dog comes to you, he's itching, he's got like, ear inflammation, things like that. I was like, what is the bad thing you do? And obviously food should be ideally the quickest fix that you can get there once you know that, you feel the diet is actually not, the diet they're currently on is not the perfect one for them, right? But then she talked as well about, like there are so many things that we can do, like check their hormones, the gut microbiome test. And it's like, you just do not get told that ever. And I had that, funny enough, when Rusty was a puppy, he was the same. He was constantly, for the first year of his life, I was working with Sue Armstrong, and she asked me to send Rusty's history since he was a puppy. And the amount of ear infections, eye infections, anal glands problem. I never had actual itching with him, like on the skin, but he was getting from the moment I got him to when he was, I would say, like 8 months, which is when I changed his diet to go to fresh. He was on Royal Canin for Cavaliers because that's all I knew that was good for him from the breeder and from the vet that I had at the time, right? Before I started to do any of my research and things like that. And he was constantly inflamed. And it's just so interesting to just see how powerful food can be, because now I freak out every time. Like, we're going to Italy in a few weeks' time, and I'm just like, how am I going to feed him? Like his diet just works so perfectly. It makes me freak out to just think if he's not going to get that, he's going to get sick, because I'm like, he's just works for him, And the reality of it is, she was saying yesterday, Dr. Odette, like if you switch food in dogs, they shouldn't get ill. If they get ill, there is some kind of underlying problem there, right? And funny enough, it makes sense because we did a gut microbiome on Rusty a few months ago, and it turns out he has, I think it's called Prevotella, a relevancy of 60%. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? I was like, he's been fed raw food for 4 years and things like that. But again, you just do not know if any of antibiotics that he had in his life or anything else will have triggered that in his gut microbiome, and it's just stayed there. And I was just like, I will have never had visibility of that if I didn't do that. I said, and I could have gone another 5-6 years and his gut will have just stayed inflamed. And it just shows how important it is to just look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
To really achieve, kind of like the best possible outcome in terms of like, longevity and, overall health for their entire life, as opposed to just say, oh yeah, stays on that food all their life, all done. I don't care. He's doing well. The poop looks good. No, it's not the case. You have to look at the whole picture and the whole
Yeah,
body and what it's telling
I
you.
think people actually forget that sometimes as well. With medication, you can see that the symptoms go away, but once they stop it, it comes back. But actually, diet and even herbs and nutraceuticals can be used to suppress symptoms as well. So even though you get them on like a nice diet that works, but if they then switch, and then obviously they can still either like there can be a sensitivity issue, or like that there's still underlying issues there, which most likely it is. But yeah, I think people forget that part, that actually you can mask symptoms with diet and nutraceuticals as well. I use a lot of Western herbs on myself. Like if I get ill, for example, I don't do very well with medication like NSAIDs or paracetamol. So I tend to go for like to drink tea or like to take some herbs, to take some supplements. And usually, that suppresses my symptoms, but it also kind of helps me get through it. But overall, you use it mostly for symptom management as well. So yeah, you can definitely use all of it also for symptom management, and you can help fix your problems as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I completely agree. I'm the same. Like from a human perspective, is I get sick. I load myself with, like the usual Sudafed, the things that we have at least here in the UK for a cold or a flu, full of paracetamol and ibuprofen. It takes me 10 days to get better. I'm not joking. 10 days. I started feeling ill like a few days ago. And I was like, I'm not going to take anything. Like you said, tea, herbs, put it all, simmer it, drink. And it didn't get worse. I woke up the next day, I was fine. I had a really horrible sore throat. And I was like, I'm not going to take anything. Like in principle, I'm just not going to take anything. And it shows. And this is why I'm such a big believer of natural versus not natural. I think if I'm really, really ill, I can't move and I really need it, and I'll take whatever I need to take. But you have to always kind of look at the risks and the benefits and how your body reacts. And that goes for dogs as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The risk versus benefit should always be your question for any medication. And even every vet should look at, pros versus cons, not necessarily this is indicated for that, but what are the side effects and what do you get from it? Like how necessity is it? Like how well are they going to feel versus how bad they're going to get with the side effects, basically.
Yes. I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so much, first of all, for sharing all your, expertise and knowledge and, all the advice you've given today. It's just amazing. Now, if I am a dog parent, I'm listening to this episode today and I have some kind of follow-up questions and I kind of would like to reach out to you directly, what is the best way for me to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on both Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I have my own website, so you can reach me by email. My website is www.purple.vet, quite simple, and the same with most of my handles are purple.vet, so it's quite easy. In general, I do have online consults with referrals and nutrition consults, and even like if you just want to discuss one case, I also do like shorter consults just to discuss something if people want to just discuss one thing with an integrative vet. I also have some good resources on my website. I have free PDFs on how to transition to raw diet, or generally how to transition to a diet. I have some ebooks on acupressure, how to do acupressure, and a little bit about an ebook about intervertebral disc disease. And I have a 3-hour-long video course extensively explaining how to choose the right pet food. And that teaches you everything from reading the ingredient labels, how different foods are processed, what to look for, what are buzzwords, how is it created, all the regulations around it, and even like for specified needs, like for cats and dogs, what to look for a different breed, age, size, and so on and so on. Everything is in there. So that should help you for managing the pet food aisle and to choose the best commercial pet food available to you.
Amazing. This is absolutely brilliant. So I'll make sure I link all the social media links and your website on the show notes when the episode go live, so you'll be able to find it down here in the description section. But yeah, honestly, I knew I was gonna love chatting to you again, but I loved it. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights. You are absolutely amazing. And yeah, what the feedback I got last time, if people just love you naturally, like they just listen to you, they're like, I just really, really love Tina.
I'm happy to hear that, and I hope it resonates for some people out there, because I've been one of those who's gone to loads of different doctors and nobody found out my issues, nobody understood where I was coming from. So I think it's just nice to have more holistic people out there that can help people, because I think so many people are suffering and not getting the help that they need. So I'm happy to be one of those people that can help.
I love that. Thank you so much. Honestly, thanks again for your time. I loved it.
That's awesome. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for watching. If you found this episode helpful, follow us on Instagram. And if you want first access to DAFY, join our waitlist now. The links are in the show notes.